Now, conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza are taking centre stage at the G7 summit.
Yes, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is having a break from the election campaign to travel to the Political and Economic Forum in Italy, where he's meeting with world leaders, including Emmanuel Macron and Joe Biden. There you can see him.
Could be his last big gig with all of the world leaders. They've stuck him right on the end there. Well, we're now joined by geopolitics expert Marco Vicenzino. And Marco, what on earth is on the agenda for this summit? And frankly, will they be paying attention to what Rishi Sunak is saying?
Listen, Rishi Sunak passed, it seems likely that past the 4th of July, he will be prime minister, very unlikely. So I think for the most, and it's not only him, it's also, you look at President Macron in France, he was decimated in the European elections. That's why he called for a dissolved parliament, called for snap elections. You have President Biden going. This may be his last summit. Obviously, it's an uphill battle for the American election. You have Scholz in Germany. He was hurt in the European elections by the far right. And the real one here is the host of the event, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. She's the strongest one standing out of all the leaders right now, because her party came out very strong at the top of the list in the European elections. Now, with respect to the issues that above is Ukraine, Russia, primarily about $50 billion of loans in Ukraine, how to service that. There's been debate, and there seems to be a consensus, at least for now, that $300 billion in Russian assets that lie in the West, primarily in the European Union, the interest from those $300 billion will be used to service the loans of $50 billion that will be made to Ukraine. So, and there's a lot more details to work out towards the end of the year, but I think they'll sign something provisional at this specific summit. You also have the issue of China. China, I think there's unanimity amongst all in the G7 about China's industrial overcapacity distorting global markets, and that's a real serious issue. Also, Middle East. Is that all will be pushing for a ceasefire and the conflict in Gaza, and also issues like artificial intelligence. Now, we live in a world whereby we call it a fragmenting world, a far more dangerous world, and you largely have three poles. One we can call the revisionist autocracies, which would be Russia, China, Iran, and some other countries. The global West, which is represented by the G7. And then what people call the global South, I refer to as the global rest, which is 140 countries, each with their own interests and differing interests. Now, the G7 has often been accused of being elitist. Hence, what the G7 does is that it's trying to reach out to that global rest. They're inviting the leaders of developing countries like India, Brazil, Argentina, Turkey also. So they're trying to put up a face. But the thing is, the key thing to understand is that in these three poles, the G7 is struggling right now. And the level they want to show is unity, strength behind Ukraine. But once again, domestically at home, many of those leaders may not be there within a year.
But Marco, you mentioned Brazil and India specifically. These are two countries that are members of BRICS, which, of course, isn't a formal organisation, or it was becoming slightly more of a formal organisation with regard to links between China and Russia and India and Brazil and the rest of them, South Africa as well now. But crucially, where do these two rising powers sort of fall between those two poles? And have the recent election results across Europe and the likely election results in the United Kingdom as well weakened the status of some of these players in Italy today?
Yes, I mean, a weak is the hand of the UK. The US remains, once again, it's up for grabs, this election in the US, so it's not looking good for Biden. I think for the West in general, there is a lot of issues that their internal politics are weakening their strength as a unit, as that global West. In terms of, we're talking about, we can call them the middle powers, countries like Brazil, Argentina, Turkey. There's two key organizations that they have a representation in. One is the BRICS that you refer to, and the other one is the G20. And those are two important forums. The BRICS is, once again, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and they've invited others. The debate within the BRICS is two ways. The Chinese are trying to use the BRICS as something that they can push forward their agenda internationally. While on the other hand, within the BRICS, you got countries like India and Brazil that are trying to push for greater economic representation in the world for the countries within the BRICS. So you have primarily China leading one pole within the BRICS and India leading another pole within the BRICS with the support of Brazil. Let's shift to the G20. The G20, I think, in my opinion, it's the forum that really represents what the power structure is gearing to in the world today. Is you have a lot more representation, the 20 biggest economies in the world. And at the annual G20, there's actually a lot being discussed. Obviously, there's not going to always be unanimity in the G20, but I think it's the most important forum because it's where you have the greatest representation of countries, of the real reflection of global politics around the world, while the G7 represents that global West. Once again, revisionist autocracies, global West, and the global rest, represented by more than 140 countries. We're living in a very difficult, fragmenting world, and it's not getting any easier.
And Marco, just very quickly to finish, how important are these summits as events? Because sometimes they're accused of being simply talking shops for leaders to take nice pictures, to have nice conversations with other leaders, to feel good about the future and so on. But how important are they really?
It depends the specific time in history or that specific moment. Most times the agendas are set in advance. So when the agendas are set in advance, these summits become a formality like you're pointing out. But during times of crisis like we have now, we have in a world of multi-crisis, these summits are very, very important because you have things that are changing on a daily basis, moment by moment. And by the time when the agenda is set, to the actual summit, things can be very different. So these summits in times of crisis play an extraordinarily important role when these leaders are able to meet face to face.
Okay. Well.